All right, so what we're going to be doing is taking some notes on multiplying with fractions. So the first thing we're going to do is label multiply with fractions. And then if you want, you can put like some multiplication symbols around it. And then if you want, you can just write some random fractions around it too. I'm going to find some other colors to have ready here. I'm just writing random fractions. Okay, so we want to remember what we know about the multiplication symbol. So the first thing on our notes we're going to do is we're going to remind ourselves what the multiplication symbol means, right? So we're going to make kind of a big multiplication symbol because we know that when we grab what we already know and hook it with new information, it stays better. So we want to review what we know about multiplication, right? So, and we're going to write, what is, when we hear the word multiplication or we see the multiplication symbol, what is it that Mrs. Britton says she wants you to always think of? You guys remember? What two words? Does anybody remember? One starts with a G. You're supposed to make the symbol and you're supposed to think something in your head. Briley, do you know what it is? What does that mean besides multiply? Can't hear you, Briley.
Yeah, this is the same problem I
Groups of.
Groups up, okay? So everybody, I want you to either do a wrist groups up or a finger groups up, but do it to your camera and say groups up. Okay, here I go. I'm gonna count down. You're all gonna do it. 1, 2, 3. Groups up, okay? So guess what we're gonna label this? Okay, groups up. So I have a question. Do we want to write groups up this way? Do we want to write it below it? What do you guys think? What do you want to do?
You're writing it by next.
Yeah, right next to it. So I'm going to put an arrow pointing at this, and then I'm going to say multiplication means, and then we're going to make this kind of big. And I think I'm going to go back to a different color even. Means groups up, okay? All right, so then after you do that, we're gonna model out, we're gonna draw a model of what multiplying with a fraction would look like, okay? Let's review what we know about fractions before we continue. If you want to pull up that prior knowledge, right? And so if I go back to our fraction page, we're going to talk about the bottom number. The bottom number tells us how many pieces it takes to make a whole thing. And the top number tells us how many pieces we have. Okay? So let's remember that. One other thing I want to talk about is, and I'm not going to, yeah, we'll talk about it. Okay. So we're going to make a note on how to turn a whole number into a fraction quickly, okay? So, so does anybody have a guess? And I'm going to go to my whiteboard for a minute because I don't know if I've talked about kabamming it. Have I talked about kabamming it with you guys? Do you know what I mean by kabamming it? Oh, this is my favorite thing in the world. It's like,
Bam.
kabam. You know me and my sound effects. Okay. So if, are you guys stay with me because your mind might blow. Are you ready for this? All right. So if I have the whole number 3 and I want to turn it into a fraction, you've got to watch my screen. Are you ready? Okay. The top number tells me how many pieces I have, and the bottom number tells me how many pieces it takes to make a whole thing. So if somebody said, write the whole number 3 as a fraction, I go, kabam. Okay, so remember the top number tells us how many pieces we have. The bottom number tells me how many pieces it takes to make a whole thing. So if I had the whole number 7 and I wanted to write it as a fraction, are you ready? See if you can figure out what I mean by kabam. Kabam. Okay, is it a fraction now? Yes or no? Yeah, it's an improper fraction, right? Okay, how many pieces does it take to make a whole thing? 1. How many pieces do I have? 7. So how many whole things do I have? Well, 1 will go into 7 times, right? So anytime you need to turn a whole number, I don't care what it is, into a fraction, you kabam it. Boom, you drop a 1 under it, and it's instantly a fraction. Did that blow your mind? Okay, the kabam thing is one of those random strange Mrs. Britton things. It's not going to show up in your math book. So when you guys move on to middle school and high school, and your teacher says, how do you turn a whole number into a fraction? Don't say you kabam it and don't add to that, because they're going to look at you like, what's going on? Okay, but you guys know, right? You kabam it, okay? So get a whiteboard for a minute. We're going to step away from our notes just for a second. Get a whiteboard. If you don't have a whiteboard paper, I guess. And I'm going to have you, we're going to rapid kabam, and then you're going to hold your answer up like this, okay? So I'm going to tell you a number, but this is what it's going to look like, okay? So don't watch. I'm going to model it for you. So are you watching my screen? So if Mrs. Britton says 8, the first step is you're going to hold your 8 up so I can see that all you have is an 8, okay? And I'm going to wait for everybody to have that. So everybody do that. And then I'm going to say kabam it, and you're going to turn it into a fraction and hold it back up, but do not do that step first. So everybody write an 8 down on something and hold it up so I can see. And by something, I don't mean like your wall, okay? Yeah, we're going to kabam it. Okay. Should we work kabam it into our notes? Would you like to do that? Should we do that? Okay. So are you guys ready? Wait, Sawyer, I don't see your 8. Where's your 8? Everybody hold up your 8. We're going to hold up an 8, and then I'm going to have you kabam it. You're going to kabam it as fast as you can and hold it back up. Ready? All right. Turn that 8 into a fraction, which means you kabam it. Did you beat me?
Yes.
Okay, Melanie, don't put a parentheses around that 8 because that actually means another math function that we'll talk about later on in math, so you don't want to do that. Nice job. Okay, we're going to kabam one more on the whiteboard, and then we'll take it to our notes. So let's start with the number 2. So first hold up your 2 because we're going to race to kabam it. And by kabamming it, we're turning it into a fraction. Okay? So hold up the whole number 2. Hold it up. Hold it up. All right, turn that into a fraction. Boom, kabam. Nice job. Okay. All right, so now let's go back to our notes. Good job, you guys. So on our notes, we need to talk about to hold, so change whole number, and this whole is spelled with a W. Do you guys remember that this means number? That means number. People now hashtag pound sign, but it also means number, shorthand for number. So change whole, if you want to write number down there, you can. Whole number into a fraction. And then we'll do an example, right? Kabam. Okay, so put a 1 below it. And there's my kabam. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do what I'm going to look for one that's off of our assignment, which means I need to put on my glasses to read that little writing for a minute. Okay. All right. So now we're gonna model out what 3/4 times 2 whole things looks like. Okay. So write that down and give me a cheesy thumbs up when you're there so that I know that we're ready for the next step. So we're copying down 3/4 times the whole number 2. Now, you guys, we will continue to go back throughout the year and visit adding and subtracting with fractions. But do you guys remember how Mrs. Britton told you that that adding and subtracting with fractions was actually harder than multiplying with fractions? It's true. Because when we multiply and divide with fractions, we don't have any red lights, ever. We don't have to worry about finding that bottom number, the least common multiple. So we'll talk about why later. So we get to skip that step always. We always have a green light, we just go, okay? Okay, so we're gonna do it the math way and just write it down, okay? And then we're also gonna do it the model way. But actually, I think I wanna draw the model and then I'll do the math problem over here now that I'm looking at my space. Okay, so let's talk about what this is telling me, right? I have 3/4, and if I read this backwards, because it doesn't matter what order I go in, right? Because if I said, you guys tell me what the answer to 2 times 3 is. Say it out loud. 2 times 3 is what? Oh, that was weak. Those of you at home, your mouth should be moving. Okay, what's 2 times 3? Okay, what's 3 times 2? 6. Does it matter what order we times it in when we multiply? No, we can switch the order. It doesn't matter. So if I said 2, oops, I was going to use my hand. So if I said 2 groups of 3/4, okay, try to picture in your head what that looks like for a minute, and then we're going to draw it, okay? We're going to use the lines on here to help us. So this bottom number tells me how many pieces does it take to make a whole thing? 4, okay? And we have 2 groups of them. So we're going to first just draw 2 whole thing fraction strips that are divided into 4 sections. And then we'll worry about the fraction part. So I'm going to number this way. I'm just going to use the lines on this to help it be even. So I'm going to number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to make a space. And I'm going to number 1, 2, 3, 4. So do that and then put a box around it. That way, see how I use the lines to make my sections? See how I kind of cheated? Use the lines to make my sections. Okay, so I numbered on the lines. So this is one whole thing, and this is another whole thing. And if I were to shade it all in, which I'm not going to, because I don't have 2 whole things, I have 2 groups of 3/4. So we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute, okay? Think about it on your own for a minute, and then I'm going to ask you to talk about what you think the answer might be before I show you, okay? The reason why I want to do that is that gets you using, even if your answer and your thoughts aren't correct, it gets you using your higher level thinking. And I always want you to engage your brain, okay? So we haven't finished the model yet, but if we had 2 groups of 3/4, what do you think the answer might be? Don't write it down yet on your notes, but what do you think it might be? Does anybody want to give us a guess? What do you think it might be? What do you think, Raya? 8. Raya's going to guess 8. Okay. Anybody else want to make a guess? Okay. So now I want you guys, if you have a highlighter or something lighter, because we don't want to shade it all in. You snooze, you lose, Sawyer. You get to answer the question in a minute. We're going to drawing now because you guys are leaving me for a minute, so I want to get at a good spot here. Okay, so remember, this tells me how many pieces I have, right? And this tells me how many pieces to make a whole thing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to circle 3 of them, or shade in 3 of them, because it's telling me that I have 3 out of the 4. But how many groups of do I have? I have 2 groups of those. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to shade in 3 out of my 4. Okay? Do you see why we did that? Because this says I have 2 groups of them, not just 1 3/4. This is saying I have 2 groups of them. All right? So then, how many do we have shaded in all together? How many? Because each of these is 1/4, right? So this is 1/4, there's 1/4, there's 1/4, there's 1/4. So how many of these do we have shaded in all together? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we say 6 are shaded. Okay, which means that our answer will be 6/4. Okay? Now, I left some room here because I want to talk about kabamming for a minute, right? So if we were going to just multiply this without making a model, but it's important that we see what it looks like in our mind, okay? So we need to have a model. But let me show you how I would rewrite this, right? So I have 3/4. Oops, not 3/3. Let me try that again. I'm going to have to make that something cute later. Okay. So I'm going to come down here. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to skip colors too. I'm going to have 3/4 times, now, do you see how we talked about kabamming it up here? I'm going to write this at this whole number as a fraction. So I'm going to put 2/1. That is the same thing as a whole number 2. Okay? So 3/4 times 2. So that way, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to times straight across. So 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 1 is 4. Do these match? Yeah. Okay. So what I did was I kabammed my whole thing, meaning I turned it into a fraction and I lined them up and I timed straight across. When we multiply, we don't have to worry about a common bottom number, you guys. It's much easier than adding and subtracting. Okay. So then we'll just say times straight across. We'll put a happy face because I think it's much, much easier than adding and subtracting, don't you, with fractions?